By now you might be beginning to despair that it's possible to say anything about what kind of god Cernunnos was. The animals on the Gunster cauldron, the crossed legs, and the fact that the snake has a ram's head have all turned out to be meaningless. Other than the distribution of his worship, what can we say about him? What is left to tell us anything? The obvious place to look is among the gods, both Roman and Celtic, who are represented along with him. Before turning to those, however, there is one last bit of noise that needs to be removed, an inappropriate comparison with another god, the one found on this Indus Valley seal. The first thing to consider is that it is from years and thousands of miles away from the closest Cernunnos. It would take a lot of evidence to show a convincing connection. Not only is the evidence not there, there is contradictory evidence. To begin with, the figure is more likely to be female than male. What appears to be a phallus is actually a decoration on a belt, something associated with female figures in the Indus Valley. The rings on its arms are those found only on female figures. The fan-shaped headdress is also worn only by females. If this isn't enough, there are images of the figure in profile in which it is shown to have breasts. In addition, the animals surrounding the figure are most likely artistic elements, since there are other images that lack them. Finally, and I think this most convincing, the Indus Valley figure has buffalo horns, not antlers. It's a bit funny, too, that the two horns have been seen by some Celticists as connecting the figure with Cernunnos, while the three parts of the headdress have led some Indologists to connect it with Shiva. With the Indus Valley eliminated, we can return to Gaul and the gods that are found there with Cernunnos. This block from Bahrain has Cernunnos on one face and three other gods on the others. Unfortunately, this is more frustrating than informative, since there isn't enough on the other sides to tell us what kind of gods these three were. One famous Gaulish god found in connection with Cernunnos is Essos. We know little about him. The cranes and bull relief is somehow connected with him, and we have a text that says that humans were sacrificed to him and that he was identified with either Mercury or Mars. Another text may connect him with healing, and there is an inscription where Essunertus, or Strength of Essos, is a title of Mercury. The Notre Dame image is more cryptic than informative. A man is trimming a willow tree. It is sometimes said that he is cutting it down, but he isn't holding an axe, but a bill, a tool which is used in pruning. Why he is pruning the tree, and more importantly, why sailors would erect an image of a god pruning a willow tree, is anyone's guess. Perhaps the pruning caused the growth of poles, which were then used to propel craft to the swampy Seine. We simply don't know enough about Essos for him to be of any help in understanding Cernunnos. Smertullus is more promising. We don't know much about him either, but he is shown here attacking a serpent with a club. This is also the way Hercules was sometimes shown. Some connection between Smertullus and Hercules may therefore be met here. I'll discuss them when I talk about that god. With one exception, which will also be dealt with later, the only other Celtic deities Cernunnos is connected with are the unknown ones from Bahrain and the goddesses at Semerico and Sant. Like most of the similar goddesses from Gaul, we don't have a name for them. Based on the cornucopia, however, we can assume that they were connected with agricultural abundance. If we make the reasonable assumption that the intent is for them to complement Cernunnos, we can conclude that he stands for another kind of abundance. Mention should be made here of the deities from Louis Saint-Georges, but we can't even tell whether they are Celtic or Roman, let alone what deities they are. The Gaulish deities have disappointed us then. What about the Roman ones? The first of them we will look at is Mercury. It is often said, and rightly so, that of all other gods, Cernunnos is most connected with Mercury. We've seen him twice at Rheims and at Lyon, and possibly Vendouvre. The Mercury-Cernunnos association goes beyond connection, though, into conflation. The two are mixed together in various ways. The purse he is often found with is an attribute of Mercury, especially among the Celts. Mercury and Cernunnos can be mixed together even more closely. It starts with the wings on Mercury's hat looking like antlers, as in this statue from Clermont-Ferrand. There is another image from the same place that makes the identification differently. This god has Mercury's caduceus, but unlike the classical Mercury, he is bearded and sitting down. His legs are crossed a bit at the bottom, which is our first hint that he is partially Cernunnos. The connection goes further when we note that a ram-headed serpent is resting its head in his lap. The ram-headed serpent also accompanies this god from Nery-le-Bon, who wears Mercury's hat and holds Mercury's purse. There is this image from Puy-de-Touge, where it has a god wearing Mercury's hat sitting cross-legged on a platform. Finally, on a relief from the Beauvais Museum, Mercury is accompanied by horned snakes. Cernunnos is therefore strongly associated with Mercury, to the point where the two are sometimes combined. And yet Mercury is not a god of animals, the forest, or the wild. It seems odd, in fact, that many writers who identify Cernunnos as that kind of god mention only a sentence or two later the strong connection with Mercury, who decidedly is not. For the Gauls, Mercury's primary concern is with financial prosperity and commerce, his purse being more common than the caduceus. A second Roman god found with Cernunnos is Hercules. A stone block from Metz has an image of Hercules on one side and Cernunnos on another. Hercules is also on the grouping from Sant, with his bulls there supporting both him and Cernunnos, and a Mirabeau accompanying this standing Cernunnos. The Mirabeau Hercules image has been identified as the god Cercellus, but what he has over one of his shoulders is almost certainly the lion skin that Hercules always wears. There is also a lost block from Alb, which may have shown a standing Cernunnos, a Hercules, a victory, and an unidentified goddess with an open purse in one hand and coins in the other. As we have seen, Hercules may be present in Celtic guise at Notre Dame as Smertulus. Hercules had a number of functions. Here I'd like to point out that because of the journeys he had to make for his labors, he became a patron of travelers and, by extension, of merchants. Apollo appears twice, at Rheims and Vendouvre. In neither case is he the only other god present, however. In one case he is definitely accompanied by Mercury, and in the other this is likely. Finally, there are the gods from the Pillar of the Sailors. I've already mentioned the possible Hercules on the same block with Cernunnos. Also on that block are Castor and Pollux, gods of sailors. This block can therefore be interpreted as having two sailors' gods, one merchant or traveler's god, and Cernunnos. The evidence from the Roman deities, as well as the occupation of the erectors of the Notre Dame pillar, give us the message that Cernunnos was a god connected with commerce. This interpretation turns the usual one on its head. Instead of being a god of nature, he is god of culture. This does not completely negate Bober's identification of Cernunnos with Pluto. Pluto was god of the underworld, and therefore god not just of the dead, but of the metal riches to be found under the ground, those represented by Cernunnos' torque and coins. Having concluded that Cernunnos was a god of special interest to merchants, we still have to ask why. How did this deity with antlers become associated with commerce? To answer this, I will now look at not just the elements of his representations, but how they are depicted in relation to each other. I will show that they don't just have individual meanings, but are a part of a system.